My name is Dustin. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is June 26, 2007, and for that, I'm really grateful. My home group is the SOS group. I have a sponsor. His name is Chris D. He lives just outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia, and I get to sponsor people. I was handed a chip, and I missed the punchline of Vance's joke. I think he was saying that I was mean or something, and I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. And then he was talking about giving me counsel. I would phrase that a different way and just say that we have become friends and we talk about stuff. So I am sorry for inconveniencing you, Vance. I'm super grateful to the Parkcrest group. SOS, I do this every year in my home group. My mom has gotten to come to every birthday talk that I've given at SOS. SOS is not wheelchair accessible. And one of the reasons I try to do this is so that she can be here. So I like to think that she's the most important person in this room right now. But I'm really grateful that Parkcrest, allows people to come speak. So I think that's really cool. Sort of like Vance said, I have this condition of sobriety called alcoholism that really has nothing to do with how much I drink. When I got to AA, I thought my alcoholism had something to do with the amount of Aristocrat vodka that I drank, which was a lot. I have since learned that was the only treatment I had for my alcoholism for a long time, that I have a spiritual malady, a condition of sobriety, a sober illness called alcoholism, that when I stopped treating it, like you guys were the only people that told me, like, when you got physically sober, it was the worst you ever felt. And that made sense to me. And so a lot of different things that I didn't know prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. Experience, strength, and hope, and like what happened, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like today. I'll try to run through that pretty quickly. I have nothing from my childhood that I can look back on and say that's the reason I'm an alcoholic. I had a pretty good childhood. I mean, not that it wasn't without like its, things. There was no abuse in the household at all. I had two parents when I was in 5th grade. I was like one of the only kids in the class that still had both of his parents married. I grew up with a dog and an older sister in a tree house. There was nothing like looking back on that I could say like, yeah, if that happened to you as a child, like you'd turn into an alcoholic too. I found other excuses, but I really had a pretty good upbringing. At one point, it's funny the things you remember. At one point when I was really young, I remember getting teased by, I don't know if it was my mom and my sister and a neighborhood girlfriend. I was probably in like 1st grade, and they teased me for having a girlfriend. And I remember at the time thinking how embarrassed I felt. And I remember saying, I'm never telling my parents anything again. I grew up with this belief that my sister, who's 3 years older than me, and she's a dork. She's not here to defend herself now, but she's kind of a dork. She always got good grades and she always stayed out of trouble. And I was the youngest kid, and I became a class clown and kind of wanted attention and did really well in school. All this stuff sort of came to a head when I was 14 or 15 years old. And I remember feeling the effect produced by alcohol for the first time. And all of the sudden, that fear of like, I don't want to get embarrassed, I'm not going to tell my parents anything, was gone. My sister's better than me, I'm never going to be good enough, all that stuff was gone. For one of the first times in my life, I remember a sense of ease and comfort. That's what our book says. It also describes what someone like me is like sober. And it says restless, irritable, and discontented. That's not, the first time I read that, I thought, well, yeah, when you drink a bunch of vodka, you get crazy and you're restless, irritable, and discontented. And that's not what it says. It says that that's the way I am sober. And that was the case. I mean, when I look back, even before I ever drank, I was restless, irritable, and discontented. I'd get mad over, I was just an angry kid sometimes. And so when I was about 15, it was honestly relatively late, 15 or 16 years old, I was at my sister's apartment. Someone got us Bacardi Silver. I had a couple of those, and I remember feeling, honestly, like my nose was tingling. I remember like this weird feeling in my body, like it was one of the coolest things I'd ever done in my life. My drinking started with Bacardi Silver. I can assure you it didn't get a whole lot cooler than that. Um, you know, my late sponsor, John Bayless, is a guy that I'll talk about. His story, he would tell you that the first time he tried cocaine out of a little vial, and 2 weeks later he was buying duffel bags full of it, and he was helping people find cars before they knew they were lost, and all this stuff. And I'm like on the opposite end of that spectrum. I just drank a bunch of vodka and pissed myself like pretty frequently. So um, never stole a car, none of that stuff. But yeah, so I remember the effect produced by alcohol. I remember what that was like the first time, and I don't remember, thinking like I'm going to let this destroy my life or anything like that. But I remember thinking like I'm going to have to do this more. I'm going to have to do this more. And so my freshman year of high school, which is about when this started, I had all A's and one B. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I could drive, which means you can pretty much get away with doing whatever you want to do. I failed a bunch of classes. I mean, I barely graduated high school. I had a 63% in one class that I needed to graduate. So I graduated high school by like a 3% margin. The second time I took the ACT, I got a 29 on it, which is like a solid score. So it's like I was throwing my life away at a very young age. I developed this, belief that anything I could be doing was going to be better with rum or vodka, And so I had a job at this restaurant in the mall, and this guy that was older than me said, "Can I get a ride home?" And this would be like a Tuesday or Wednesday night. And I said, "Well, I'll give you a ride home if we can swing by the Brown Derby," and you figure out pretty quickly like how to get this stuff. I had a sponsor before I got to AA. I didn't know it was a sponsor at the time, but I had this real good friend of mine named Brandon. Brandon has since moved back to California and is dead due to drugs and alcohol. But this friend of mine named Brandon, that it seemed like he knew how to drink the way I wanted to drink, and people liked him. Like he was the life of the party, and he was kind of like well connected and all that stuff. And I remember thinking, I want what he has, and I'm going to be willing to do what he does. And one time in particular, I remember we were driving. This is so weird. I remember exactly where we were, and was essentially right across the street from where TGIS meets. They're on like Republic Road, and we're driving in my Saturn, and he's got a fifth of Captain Morgan's, and he turns it upright and drinks about half of it. And I remember in that moment thinking, that's one of the coolest things I've ever seen anyone do, and man, and that's what I tried to do. I would do anything I could get my hands on. I've never been like a hardworking person. It's that spot in the big book where it says you're going to have to curb his desire to work 16 hours a day. Like that never applied to me. So I never had the type of money to do cocaine or ecstasy frequently. But I can assure you, I would do whatever I could get my hands on. It just so happened that a 175 of Aristocrat vodka cost about $12 at the only gas station that would take my fake ID in town. And so that's what I did the majority of the time. So that didn't work really well. I started getting in a lot of trouble. So before my senior year of high school, I was arrested 4 times, 3 for DWIs. One of them sort of got dropped. So it was like 2 DWIs, and then I got arrested for having a Xanax that wasn't mine, which I found out is illegal. And so as a result of that, I went to my first rehab. I went to this place in Boonville, and I was there for 28 days or whatever. And I had no idea no intention to stay sober forever. I just thought this rehab is probably going to help me like figure things out a little bit, clean my life up. I'm getting ready to go to college in a year, and there's no way that I'm not drinking ever again. And the one thing about that place is they didn't do a great job of introducing you to Alcoholics Anonymous. So like that, the announcement was made that Parkcrest takes a meeting into Burl or Center Point, whatever it's called, the inpatient treatment center here in town. If you're a homegroup member and you haven't ever gone to that, like go to that. That place does a really good job of like mandating, exposing people to Alcoholics Anonymous. And so this treatment center I was at, it wasn't like a requirement. So I went to maybe 1 or 2 meetings while I was up there. I remember thinking, I'm going to have to find a way to fill my time. And so the thing that I got into was modeling, like the little plastic models. And I got this, I got like John F. Kennedy's PT boat and, was putting it all together, and I had the paint and like was getting super into it, like painting eyeballs on the face and all this stuff. And, I remember thinking like, I'm going to have to find ways to, occupy my time now. And, this is the only time to this day, this is the only time this has ever happened. But one of the people working at the treatment center was like, well, technically you're not supposed to have this, model stuff. And I said, well, why not? They said, well, some people will take the glue or the paint and they will huff it. I went, yeah. Had no idea. Legitimately, I had no idea that was a thing. So later that night, I went back to my room and got a plastic bag and put some of it in there and tried to huff it. And I don't remember if it did anything for me or not, but that's the only time I've ever tried that. So needless to say, like did not stay sober. The girl I was dating at the time, who I put through complete like unbridled alcoholism hell, like this girl that I dated in high school for a couple years, she texted me right around the time I was getting out and said, well, I've got some ecstasy. And I thought, well, that's a special occasion, that doesn't count. Really? I mean, you can, I can not drink, but like every once in a while I'll do the special occasion drugs and all that stuff. I didn't know then that I had this phenomenon of craving. And that was one of the things that I had, like you guys had to relate this to me for me to understand what alcoholism is. You guys would talk about, like when I got here, you would say like, well, it's like if you have cancer, you're physically different from normal drinkers. And I would think that probably works on some of the dumb kids, but that one's not going to work on me. Like, I know I just need to say no. I need to Nancy Reagan. And I know that I just make bad choices, until it was explained to me that the phenomenon of craving is like the more I drink, the thirstier I get. I have the first one and I'm just a little bit thirstier for the second one. And I have the second one and I'm just a little bit thirstier for the third one. And by the time I'm knee walking drunk, all I want to do is guzzle booze, and that didn't happen. I don't remember that super vividly every single time, but there are a handful of times that I specifically remember that. And our book says, if that has happened to you once, you're an alcoholic. One time. That normal people don't ever, like my grandparents, I'd go over there sometimes and they'd have like a scotch or whiskey or whatever they were drinking. And, they might drink half of it and they would talk about like getting this sensation of like being drowsy and tired. And they'd be like, oh, I can feel it. I need to stop. That never happened to me. Never happened to me. And I think about it like this has happened to me before. If you've ever had too much nicotine and you get nauseous, like you're going to throw up and you want to just curl up in the bathtub or whatever. I think for a normal person, that's kind of like what alcohol can do, so I don't understand it. I don't understand that normal drinking business, but I know I have the phenomenon of craving. And I didn't know that at the time, when I was in rehab, when I was doing all this other stuff, I didn't know that's what it was, but I learned later, and I learned from you guys that that's what I have. There's probably one more story about my drinking that's worth mentioning, again, because my sponsor later ended up being John Bayless, who was a gangster, for those of you that knew him. I had a drug dealer that was like a second or third middleman. I mean, I was just a loser, dude. I was a loser out there, like in that world. And my dad had a collection of state quarters. This is like right around the time like state quarters were coming out. And so he has this World War II treasure chest. It was what do you call it? Like a crate or something that his dad had. And he had filled this thing up with state quarters. So like 10 rolls from each of the two mints for each state quarter. So, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of dollars worth of rolls of quarters. And I found that and I was like, he's definitely not going to miss a couple rolls. And a roll is $25, which is the same as a dime bag. So I'd go meet up with this guy and he'd give me what I was looking for. And I gave him a roll of state quarters, Pennsylvania state quarters or whatever. And he looked at me and he goes, "Are you serious?" And I remember thinking like, well, dude, I can take it to the bank if you want, but it's money. Um, so that really is like sort of just imagine like that person also passed out, pissed himself, from Aristocrat vodka. Basically, that's what my drinking was like. Um, a lot of it is funny to think about today. Some of it isn't. Like the people that were around me, I did most of my drinking while I was still, or maybe all of my drinking while I was still living at home with my mom. My parents got a divorce just before I went to college, and so it was me and her in this big house. And I didn't realize that she had stayed up all night sometimes waiting on the couch because she didn't know if she was going to get a call that I was in the hospital or I was arrested again or I was dead. I didn't think about all that. All I could think about is if your parents got a divorce like mine did, if your dad was a dick like mine was a dick, if all these things happened to you, you would drink the same way that I'm drinking. Just completely immune from seeing how any of my actions affect anyone else. So I got arrested when I was in college for driving while intoxicated one more time. I remember I hit a phone, like a wooden phone pole or whatever, and I had a moment of clarity where I went, that's not good. And I went back to the party I was at, and the cops were called, and they followed the trail of fluid all the way back to my car. And so I'm pulling in on this street, getting ready to park, and I see lights behind me, and the cops, they come over, and I'm like super drunk. And I can see everyone that I was just drinking with on the front porch right over there, all my friends. And I remember thinking, I've seen all these shows, like cop shows and stuff, and if you just tell the truth, you'll be all right. They'll give you a warning or whatever. And that was not the case, man. They were like, have you been drinking? And I was like, oh, yeah. They were like, how much you been drinking? I said, way too much. There was no getting out of that one. So I got arrested. I was 20 years old. That was my third DWI that stuck. It was a felony DWI. I was already in a program called drug court, which is like super intense probation. My mom hired a really good attorney that kept me out of prison. I went to my second rehab, which was Burl or Centerpoint, whatever it's called now. One of the first things that I graduated sort of successfully, my aunt showed up. This is not a joke. My aunt showed up with a camcorder and recorded the graduation ceremony. Yeah. So that's where I met Alcoholics Anonymous, was in there. People from SOS brought a meeting in. I met some of those guys, and I don't know if I knew there was a problem. Like I knew there was a real problem. I was ready to do a lot of stuff to avoid negative consequences. I know today that I wasn't quite at that bottom because the bottom looks a little bit different for me, but I was willing to do quite a bit to avoid. I was miserable. And so these people from SOS showed up. I had a sponsor, this guy named Brandon, and I went back into, basically the meeting SOS brought in was like on Thursday nights. And so like after I got out, I went back to the Thursday night meeting at that treatment center to meet those guys. And the best 12-step call that I've ever received was after the meeting when they said, hey, we're going to go get tacos at Mexican Villa. You should come with us. And I had I've told you guys the pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization that I was. That's what I brought to you guys. That's what I brought. I had no likability. I had no wit. I didn't say things that made sense. I had nothing to offer. And you guys said, come go get tacos with us. And you didn't take no for an answer because I said, well, my mom is out in the parking lot. So I'm not going to be. They said, have your mom take us to this Mexican Villa. We'll give you a ride home. And I said, okay. So I'm super grateful for that. Taught me a really important thing that it's I don't get to decide who gets this or who comes along. It's my job to invite. It's my job to say yes. It's my job to extend the invitation because that's what you guys did for me. So my first sponsor, Brandon, got drunk when I was 2 months sober. He actually started shooting cocaine, but I'm sure drinking was a part of that. So he left for like 7 years. So part of my story is that my sponsor got drunk, and that was one of the first people that I really looked up to. I wasn't super close with my parents. I've become really, really close with my mom in sobriety. She has been she's been going to Al-Anon as long as I've been going to AA. And so we have recovery in common. Never been super close to my dad. And so my first sponsor, it was like a big brother. I really admired him. And it was when he left, went back out, that was like super tough. But I called his sponsor, this guy named Terry, later that night and got him as a second sponsor. Terry was my sponsor for about a year before I finally moved on to John Bayless. He is deceased, which is why I can use his last name and all that stuff. But when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had this really strange sensation because I heard things that I had never heard before. And they sounded like, no, don't do that. That sounds like a bad idea. And so I really thought I kind of thought you guys were all jerks. I told John Bayless on 2 separate occasions in the middle of a meeting. I've been sober 19 years. I've never seen this happen. In the middle of the meeting, I said, "You are the reason that I don't want to have sponsor people like you. Like, I don't like you." And he laughed at me and said, "Thank you." So a couple years later, I was like, this guy clearly needs to be my sponsor. I went to a lot of meetings, man. I stayed busy. I started working steps. I found an enormous amount of relief from doing the 4th and 5th step. I discovered that, I thought I was a victim most of my life. And the 4th and 5th step taught me that I was the inmate and I was the warden. That if I look at my 4th column, I can start living differently. I can start behaving differently. I can start looking at these choices that I make that put me in a position to be hurt. And so the 4th and the 5th step were super helpful to me. Steps 6 and 7, obviously, probably like everyone else in this room, have taken me quite a while to figure out what is really involved in 6 and 7. Doing steps 8 and 9 were super, super beneficial for me as well. And I'm super grateful for really good sponsorship. My grandpa is like one of the people that he wasn't an alcoholic. I don't know that I have any alcoholism in my family at all. I didn't mention that earlier, at least not my close family. I really admired my grandpa, and I got to make amends to my grandma and grandpa. And later on, when we were pregnant with Dylan, Dylan has my grandpa on my mom's side. He has my grandpa's middle name, Dylan Noble. And Noble was my grandpa's middle name. And I got to go talk to him, and tell him, this is like one of the gifts that Alcoholics Anonymous gave me, is I got to go to my grandpa and I said, we know a name for Dylan. I said, we didn't tell him Dylan. I said, we know a name for our kid. It's going to be Dylan, and his middle name is going to be Noble. And my grandpa completely melted, started crying. And it was a really cool moment. And I just would not have had that without AA. So anyways, I'm, a couple of years sober at this point. There is a friend of mine named Jake who has since left AA and gotten drunk. It's basically like what happens to everyone. Like if you stick around long enough, they're all going to die or move away or get drunk. Like, it sounds sad, but it's true. You just learn to make new friends, you get used to it after a while. It's why people like Dave start being more and more, I'm like, the longer I stay sober, the more I like Dave. Well, it's just because Dave hasn't left, man, It's like you just start liking the people that become familiar, So this friend of mine that I was running around with one time, he says, there's this girl in AA and she's having this other girl down at her lake house. Do you want to go crash the party? And I said, yeah, hell yeah. And so we go down to this girl's lake house. Her name was Allie. And that summer, a lot of us sort of younger people started hanging out at this girl's lake house. And 2 or 3 months of that went by, and I figured out I had a crush on this girl. I liked her. And I knew it had been eating me up because I was too scared to say anything. And so I called my sponsor, John, And I was going to tell him about it. And I don't know if you guys have ever had conversations like that with your sponsor, but by this point I knew how it was going to go. Have you been to a meeting? Have you read your big book? Call 3 other alcoholics, like go pray, and like don't worry about this selfish stuff you have going on. I knew that was how the conversation was going to go. So I called John, told him what was going on. I said, I think I like this girl. He goes, call her up, tell her you've been thinking about her, ask her if you're crazy or if she'd like to go get ice cream. You got 30 minutes, call me back, click. So that was like at 6 o'clock or 6:01. I waited until 6:29. I called this girl up and I said, hey, Allie, it's Dustin. My sponsor wanted me to call you and tell you that, I've got a thing for you. This is a trick if you're new, is you can absolutely throw your sponsor under the bus anytime you want to. That's what I did. I was like, I'm sure this is going to blow up in my face and it's going to be his fault. So she said, I said, I got a thing for you. Would you like to go get coffee sometime? Or what? And I knew how that phone call was going to go. She was going to say, well, Dustin, you're a great guy and everything, but I'm a year older than you. I don't know why I thought that mattered. I'm a year older than you. I have a kid already, and just sorry, like I'm not into you. That's how I knew the conversation was going to go. That's not how the conversation went. I asked her, hey, do you want to go get coffee? And she said, sure. When? I said, let me call you right back. I didn't get that far. So we start dating. She has a son, Luke, who's almost 4 when we start dating. And his dad is what I would say a woman beating, needle pushing douchebag, and has been in and out of his life, mostly out of his life since he was, 5 or 6 years old probably. But she's got this kid, Luke. We start dating. A year and a half goes by or something, and I just have to stop right here and say how grateful I am for the real members of Alcoholics Anonymous. The people that open their homes up, the people that pick up the phone, the people that don't just come to the meeting and give up, like the Dave Fights or the Dave F's. Sorry, just blew your anonymity there on YouTube. But I'm super grateful for people like that, because that's what John did for me. And so I called him up one day and I said, I'm really thinking about proposing to this girl. Like, what do you think of that? And he says, I told you my old sponsor was a gangster. He says, you come by sometime, son, and look at some diamonds I got. I go over to this guy's house and he pulls out this little shoebox that's got, just these fat rocks in it, dude. And I looked at him. I'm in college still. I said, John, there's no way I'm going to get her anything like this. Oh, I know. I just give you some idea of what's out there. But I talked to him about it, because like Vance said, dude, at the end of the day, like I'm a scared little boy that's just like pretending to be an adult. And I get in these situations, whether they're good or bad, and I don't know what to do. I get scared. How do I make adult decisions without drinking? How do I do some of this stuff? And so anyways, we get engaged. We get married. I go, talk to my sponsor shortly after we got married. I said, John, we're thinking about having a kid. What do you think about that? He's like, there's nothing to think about it. Like, what do you want me to tell you? So we get pregnant. We have a kid. We have Dylan. Dylan is 12 now. Luke is 12, almost 13. Luke is 20, almost 21. Doing incredibly well. For anyone in this room that knows Luke, he has just turned into be like a great dude. So we have this kid, when Dylan was born, his umbilical cord got wrapped around his neck, like just a little bit, just enough to make the tension in the room go like way up. Everything was fine. He had to go to the NICU for a couple hours, but it ended up being fine. Just scared the crap out of me, and so we get home from the hospital and a couple days later, whatever. And I call my sponsor up. I grew up on the Bayless couch, like in their living room, like literally. That's why so much of my gratitude comes for, I know it's Alcoholics Anonymous, but it takes people like you doing it, saying, yeah, come over. Like, we'll make you a sandwich, come hang out. We'll drop everything. You know what I mean? So I go over there and I start crying, just tell John, here's how I felt. I was so scared that my newborn son something was going to happen to him. And that's what I needed to do, So gosh, couple of years go by, summer of 2017. Um, Allie's got some stuff going on that she's not really too sure about, like medical stuff. And we go up to a doctor in St. Louis, a specialist, who calls in an oncologist, which I didn't know what that meant at the time. I know now that's never a good sign. And she was diagnosed with what was at the time essentially stage 4 cervical cancer. I think she was either 30 or 31 when she was diagnosed. I was 29 or 30. Just terrified again. Like now it's a real problem. Now, our book says like fancied or real. Now it's real. I'm not making this up. Like we're both terrified. And like one of the most beautiful moments that I can remember about my sobriety is, she was falling apart, understandably so. And she says, let's get out of here. So we go to the parking garage and we get back to the car. And I said, I need to go call my sponsor. And she says, I do too. So we walked our separate ways. I called John. She called Dana. And I remember John said, well, kid, God must think you've got pretty broad shoulders. This is where the rubber meets the road. And I remember thinking, surely there's been a mistake. Surely, like, this is not, my files got mixed up in the God box with like someone who's 60 or 70, because health problems are not supposed to happen to a young married couple who's got a 3-year-old. But that's where we were. So we spent the next year and a half going through, doing all the cancer treatment stuff, chemo and radiation. We went down to MD Anderson for a while. By this time, John, actually, his prostate cancer had come back. And so him and Lisa were going to MD Anderson a lot of times at the same time that me and Allie were. But, we're traveling all over the place doing this cancer stuff. And I'm pretty immature. I've gotten a little bit better, but my wife had cervical cancer. So going into this, I'm a young, immature kid. And I just think like, well, she probably wants her privacy when she goes in for some of these doctor's appointments. I had a conversation with my sponsor about it. And he said, you stay by her side the entire time. If she tells you she needs space, she will. And then you can leave. And I said, okay. So I took that advice. So I just basically never left her side. And about a year later, this August of 2018, she had spent half the month in a hospital because she had a complication from the radiation she had received. She had to get her entire large intestine removed, and was 2 weeks out, had chemo 2 weeks earlier, which you're not supposed to get surgery after chemo because you have no immune system, so she was in rough shape. And we were sitting over at Mercy one night, and I was late at night. We'd had a bunch of visitors, and no one was in the room, and I was up laying with her on her hospital bed. And she said, Dustin, I know there are a lot of people that would have done this with me. I could not have done this without you. And I'm so grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous gives me all the answers, like long before I know they're going to be on the test. You guys say things like, don't leave her side. So January of 2019, we went down to MD Anderson. Her dad had come down, and her dad came down, and he said, go back to the hotel and just rest for a few hours. I'll stay with her. And a half hour later or something, he calls and he says, you need to get back up here now. When I got up to the hospital, I got back to her room, and there's probably a dozen doctors and nurses in there doing CPR on her and all this stuff. And they had been for like 20 minutes. I think they were waiting for me to get there to call it. And so she died on January 9th, 2019. Alcoholics Anonymous absolutely surrounded me. My wife was much more likable than I am. At the funeral, I think there were 700 people. There was a 3-hour long line, and it was mostly people from Alcoholics Anonymous. So obviously incredibly difficult, but so grateful that I had Alcoholics Anonymous to lean back on, that she had Alcoholics Anonymous throughout that process. So I'm a single dad now with a 5-year-old that I had to tell about his mom, a like 13-year-old, I guess he was at the time. Um, and so, we're trying our best. Alcoholics Anonymous is bringing over meals and all this stuff that I'm just really, really grateful for. Um, and about 9 months after that, um, in October of 2019, John Bayless died. Um, and for me, I didn't realize this. Well, maybe I did realize this at the time, but John Bayless was like the only father figure I ever knew. Like, I wasn't super close to my dad. I don't ever remember sitting down with my dad and having to talk about, like, here's how to be a man, or here's how to treat a lady, or here's how to play baseball, or here's what to do if you get in trouble, or here's what to do if your friends are causing trouble and you don't want to be a part of it. I don't remember any of that stuff, but I had this guy that I called a sponsor that I knew. This is what I've learned in like retrospect, is like one of the things that makes a good sponsor is like, I knew regardless of what I did, he was not going to abandon me. He was not going to leave me. He may tell me I'm an idiot and he may not tell me what I want to hear, but he was not going to walk away from me. And so when I lost him, I was, honestly, that was a big hit to just the AA community. He was one of the co-founders or whatever of the Heart of the Ozarks conference. He's one of the founders of the SOS group. And so it was a huge loss, but it definitely hit our home group and it definitely hit me really hard. And, I felt lost. I got another sponsor, kind of went back and forth between a couple sponsors until I landed on the guy that I have now. But, it was tough feeling grounded in AA without the very thing that like grounded me, couple years after that go by, COVID starts. My grandpa is diagnosed with COPD at some point, has a lung surgery, pretty routine lung surgery that he gets complications from, is pretty much put on hospice, and then somehow catches COVID. And so it was just like that. He fell off a cliff and was gone. About a year after that, my grandma died. I was super close with my grandpa. And I was close with my grandma, but I was super close to my grandpa. Around this time, it was a little bit later, maybe a year later or so, my oldest kid. So I basically raised Luke, my stepson. I basically raised him. He kind of gets mad at me because I got onto him for smoking pot in the house, which I thought was reasonable. There for a while, I really thought he was going to go down the road of his biological father. And he essentially ran away, just quit coming home, moved in with Allie's parents. And that was tough. It was tough for me. It was tough for Dylan. And right around the same time, my mom used to babysit for Dylan when he was young. I'd go to the Wednesday night Road Less Traveled meeting at 8:00 over at the Stone Chapel, and she'd come over to babysit Dylan. So I get home from the meeting and say goodbye and all this stuff. And about 2 blocks away from my house, my mom was rear-ended by a drunk driver who was doing 100 miles an hour on Battlefield. She had like 17 fractures in her ribs, fractured spinal cord or spine, the bone, and a brain injury. It is a miracle that she's alive. It's a miracle that my son was not in the back seat because he'd be dead. But it's like, what do I do with this? Not that it's all about me, but it's like, I spent 6 months, my mom was babysitting for me while I was at an AA meeting and gets rear-ended by a drunk driver and essentially became a quadriplegic because of the brain injury. I spent 6 months really not believing there could be a God. I spent 6 months, the only prayer, and I had to encourage myself and remind myself that this was a prayer. The only prayer I could say was F you. I drive by that place, every day and see this little nick in the tree where my mom's car had sort of rolled to a stop and clipped some of the bark off of it. And I just thought, there's no way that there can be a God if this would happen to my mom. My mom is the nicest person that I've ever met. She's the reason I cry so much. I get that from my mom. But yeah, just thinking like, what do I do with this? Again, I go back to doing the only thing I know how to do, which is going to Alcoholics Anonymous, trying to stay busy, and all that stuff. So a lot of stuff happened over a fairly short period of time. That was in summer of 2022. A couple years after that, I meet this gal. She had been a kind of like an after-school care teacher for Dylan years ago, and she sort of knew about me, and I didn't know who she was. But I met this gal, and we started hanging out. We started dating, and it went really well. It was going really well. About a year into it, which was last summer, we got engaged to be married. And then this next part of my story I'm going to talk about, it is not my job to take anyone else's inventory. Like, it's hard enough for me sometimes to take my own inventory. I'm going to try to talk to you guys about something really difficult that I went through, and just describe like my perception and my feelings and what made it hard for me to practice these principles in all my affairs. So that's my goal here. About 6 months ago, that gal moved out. We were engaged. We had a wedding date. She had a dress. I mean, we had all the stuff. She moved out. I was really crushed. I felt like the more I tried to make it work, the worse it seemed to make things. And I felt, all these feelings that scared me because I had never felt these things so intensely in sobriety. I felt like abandoned. I felt rejected. I thought, oh my God, if this person doesn't love me, no one's going to love me. I was pretty sure everyone in Alcoholics Anonymous was judging me. It was based on zero information. It's not like anyone told me they were judging me, but I was pretty sure you guys were all judging me. Everyone thinks I'm stupid. Everyone in Al-Anon thinks I'm stupid. And I started getting these like anxiety attacks. Like I'm surprised. Like I have a job. I have a dream job. Actually, I'm kind of surprised I didn't get fired. Like I was a mess, dude. Like the last, February through May or June. I mean, I just fell apart, man. Having these anxiety attacks where it was like this constant pressure in my chest, like all day. And if the smallest thing set it off, I would just lose it. I've had times in my sobriety where the thought has crept in my head of, I should kill myself. I know I'm not the only one. It never really gets too far past that. But every once in a while, when I feel terrible, I'll think like, oh, I know what to take care of this. And since Dylan's been born, and I've been a dad, every time that thought would crop in, I'd be like, there's no way. I can't leave Dylan. And in April, I was sitting in my office at work, going through this depression, anxiety, just literally my world is falling apart. And this thought pops in my head of, I know what it in this. And for the first time, that thought was followed up with, Dylan's got good grandparents. He'll be okay. And, how do I handle life on life's terms? Like, how do I apply these principles when things don't go my way? I started getting really busy in Alcoholics Anonymous again. So I've got 3 sponsee brothers in Northern Virginia that I talk to almost every day. I've started making all kinds of phone calls. That's why me and Vance became sort of friends again. He was making fun of me earlier, but I just got busy, dude. I started going to a lot of meetings, and I started calling people, and I started being honest with them. Like, hey, can I share my 10-step with you? Like, I feel crazy, and I don't want to feel crazy. Can I talk to you about it? That's what that is, Vance. You don't need to make fun of me about it anymore, all right? And I started doing that stuff, and for the first time in my sobriety, I think I was forced to confront the fact either God is or God isn't. It took me 18 and a half years or 19 years to get there. There's this speaker that I've listened to, and I started doing all kinds of stuff. I was listening to speaker tapes again. I got a gratitude journal. I started to go see Gala. I started regular journaling. I started doing all kinds of daily readers and all this stuff. Really just trying to do everything I could for my mental health and just to stay connected to AA and a higher power. And there's this speaker, Bob D., who said this, and it really hit me. He said that, for all of us in this room, AA is the last stop on the block. He said, I think for those of us in AA, I think God is the last stop on the block. And that's 100% been my experience. I mean, I prayed the entire time I was sober. I would say the third step prayer, and I knew God was real and all that stuff. It took my life falling apart in the last 6 months for me to realize, like, oh, this God deal, this is real. This is real. Like, it's supposed to be I'm supposed to have a relationship with this higher power. I'm supposed to trust him. I'm supposed to, talk to him about stuff and realize that, oh, these crazy thoughts that are going on in my head, are those God thoughts or are those like self-reliance thoughts? And most of the time it's just me worrying about me, and I have to go, okay, God's in charge. I trust God. All right, I trust you, God, all that stuff. So it's been like this night and day difference, which has been really, really cool. I hope it doesn't take you guys that long to get there. It took me quite a while. The other thing that, and I'll sort of start wrapping it up with this, the other thing that really took me a while of staying busy in AA and talking to everyone I could talk to and talk to my sponsor. I mean, my sponsor knows he's my sponsor because I talk to him all the time. It's amazing how when you just go completely insane, like all these actions seem a lot more appealing. Like, I'm getting a little bit of relief from this. It took me about 4 months to really do an inventory. Because I think part of the thing that's easy to do, especially if you feel like you've actually been wronged, it's easy to feel victimized. And I did an inventory and realized that what happened to me was, I lost a wife, I lost a sponsor, I felt lost in AA, disconnected from God and from AA for years. I lost a grandpa. I had something terrible happen to my mom. I had all this like trauma and just stuff. And when this poor girl walked into my life, what do? I just put all of it right on her. Who's my new higher power? Is this person. And I've learned that, like, my sponsor says, when you don't have a higher power, one always shows up, and that's on me. That's not on anyone else, and that I've had to learn that the only relationship that really matters for a guy like me is the one I have with God. And if you're bristling with antagonism over that, I don't blame you at all. I would have kicked myself in the nuts probably 3 years ago if I heard someone talking. It would have just really annoyed me. Like, come on, this God stuff. But it's true, man. It's really true. So as I sit here today, like, there's this guy, Dwayne, that used to come around. He may still be coming around some, but he used to say this thing, I've been vastly overpaid. And so when I think about my sobriety and I think about these things that have not gone my way and that have been tough, really what I think about is like, I am living the best case scenario. If you would have told me 19 years ago, these terrible things are going to happen to you, here's 100 different options of what the rest of your life could look like. Like, I'm living the best case scenario. What have I done really to deserve friends in Alcoholics Anonymous that will pick up the phone and talk to me whenever I want to? What have I done to deserve just being able to sit in a meeting like this? To find gratitude over the fact that I don't have to solve my problems today by drinking Aristocrat vodka. I don't have to put a gun in my mouth. This means sometimes it doesn't sound good, but I have a way out today. So I don't know, man. I'm super, super grateful for AA. We read this at the book study last night over at my home group, and it's a paragraph out of A Vision for You that really hit me and I think really resonates. It says, but life among Alcoholics Anonymous is more than attending gatherings and visiting hospitals, cleaning up old scrapes, helping to settle family differences, explaining the disinherited son to his irate parents, lending money and securing jobs for each other when justified. These are everyday occurrences. No one is too discredited or has sunk too low to be welcomed cordially, if he means business. Social distinctions, petty rivalries, and jealousies, these are laughed out of countenance. Being wrecked in the same vessel, being restored and united under one God, with hearts and mind attuned to the welfare of others, the things which matter so much to some people no longer signify much to them. How could they? I really like that. I appreciate you guys listening to me and letting me share, and I'll pass.